Hello there, my name is David Postansky and welcome to another edition of the Mega Movie Podcast. In a world where there is only so many podcasts you can listen to, this is another one. So, my name is David Postansky, I'm from the Extreme Improv Comedy Show, and on today's episode we're going to be discussing the movie The Thing. The Thing is up there as one of my favourite movies of all time. I think it's an absolutely outstandingly incredible movie, and we're going to be talking about it today. So, it's a film from 1982. For those of you who do not know it, I suggest that as soon as I'm done talking about it, or probably in fact, if you haven't watched it, put this on pause, go and watch it, but make sure you do come back so that you can hear, because there will be spoilers. There will be spoilers in this podcast. But we're going to be talking about the film. It was made in 1982, directed by John Carpenter and written by Bill Lancaster. Now, I'm going to give the full disclosure. I have a few notes, and when I say notes, I mean I've got Wikipedia and IMDb open, just so that I can get some of these facts, dates, and people. Now, I knew it was directed by John Carpenter. Now, here's an interesting thing, which I did know, but this is giving me the reminder of it. It's based on a 1938 John W. Campbell Jr. novella called Who Goes There? Now, I've not read this. It'd be interesting to read it since I am a big fan of the movie. And it is itself not the first adaptation of this story. There was a film called A Thing from Another World, which came out in 1951, and there are similarities between this version of The Thing and that version of The Thing. In its location, interestingly, just the way they put up the title credits at the beginning. But I'm not going to be doing a comparison between the two, because I'm going to be focusing primarily on the 1982 film, with giving a little mention to its 2011 prequel that came out decades later. So what is The Thing about, and why do I think it's such a great film? It's set on a research base in Antarctica, and interestingly, I think some of it was filmed in Alaska and in places like Juneau, where I've actually been, so that was very exciting for me. But it's just like this snow-ice landscape, very, very isolated, which is hugely important to the atmosphere of the film. And there's these group of guys, I'm trying to think, I'll bring up the characters in a minute, but there's a list of 8 or 10 characters, the main one of which is MacReady, played by Kurt Russell. Now, it's not apparent that he's the main character from the beginning. It's very much an ensemble piece. But the film begins and you see a dog, a husky, running through the snow. And you get the sense from what you see that this dog is being chased by a helicopter. Now, actually, I may forget. You may have seen another scene previously. There might be an opening scene that I always forget, in fact, where there's like a spaceship. I'm just going to quickly check my facts on that. A Norwegian helicopter pursues a sled dog. No, it doesn't say about sunk from space, but in my head that's at the beginning of this film. So this helicopter pursues this dog, and you see that the researchers, the main characters on this base, are aware that there's this helicopter coming towards them, and they see that there's this dog, and a man in the helicopter is shooting at the dog, and everyone's ducking, and the helicopter lands, and this guy gets out to keep shooting at the dog, and the dog runs over to people. He's speaking in a different language, which you find out is Norwegian, so they can't understand what he's saying. And one of the good guys, I'm going to say the good guys, the people at the research base, accidentally gets clipped by being shot, and so then the person in charge, called Gary, is who's played by Donald Moffat. He smashes a window, which was a bit excessive, I suppose. Could have gone outside, but he smashes a window just because it causes them a problem. So I'm segueing off, because now they've got a busted window, and he shoots and he kills this Norwegian guy with one shot to the head. But that's after the other guy in the helicopter gets blown up. It's almost a little bit Keystone Cop-like. It's not comical, but they kind of cause their own death by being stupid here. Because a hand grenade gets thrown and it blows up the helicopter, killing the pilot, and then this other guy gets shot, and then they're left with this dog. And you see that they're trying to, I'm not going to give the whole plot, but you see that they're trying to get in touch with, like, the outside world, but it establishes that they cannot, due to the weather, get in touch with anyone in the outside world. And there's still this dog there, and they decide that, even though it's against better judgment of how the weather looks, MacReady and a couple of the others are going to go investigate what's happened at the Norwegian base where they came from. And they find that there's lots of dead people, lots of burned bodies, and some that look mutated, some that look weird. And back at the research facility, the dog is put into the kennels with the other dogs, because they always have sled dogs, being in Antarctica. And the dog mutates and kills the other dogs, and they become aware that there's some sort of monster, and they end up burning it, and they think they've killed it, and they dissect it, and they realise that this thing is imitating other things. This dog wasn't a dog, it was imitating other things. And from there, I'm not going to give the rest of the plot of just by going through it, but from there, they then realise that if this dog was an imitation and was trying to imitate the other dogs, and they saw these monstrous bodies that looked like mutants or things like this, it could imitate a person. And then begins the dread of, what if it's imitating people within their camp? How would they even know if any of them weren't who they claimed to be and was actually like an alien imitation? And what the film does so well is, one, that this concept is something that for a horror film, or, you know, it is horror, it's perhaps a little bit tamer, even though it's got some very gross effects, than certain horror films you get nowadays, but it holds up very well. But it creates this sense of fear, this lack of trust, this dread, that you look at the characters and you don't know who's a good guy. Now, as it goes on, you do get the sense that Kurt Russell, and not just because he's like the main actor in it, like the most famous actor at the time, but just by the way that they follow his story, that he is the main character. So you kind of sense that he's the good guy, that you can always trust that when they're showing MacReady, that MacReady's still human. The others, you don't know who to trust. Any of them could be the thing or a thing. And to me, it's an almost perfect film. And the reason why I say it's an almost perfect film is because with this concept, and when you see what the characters do, I pretty much, and I'll have to think about it to see if there's anything that contradicts this idea, I pretty much agree with all of the decisions the characters make. And it's not that I would say that, oh, well, I would have done something different, or I wouldn't have done anything different than any of them, but I can understand why any of them did what they did in those circumstances. Because within this scenario, where they've got the mistrust of each other, where people are panicking, people are rushing to get guns, they say something at one point which is like, we should only prepare our own meals and eat directly from the cans, because if this thing can imitate someone just by passing a single piece of DNA, then, you know, we don't trust each other. And it's brilliant, and you can see why the characters start to all infight with each other. They all start to turn on one another, mistrust one another. When a character whose name is Blair, who you see using a computer, and he works out that this thing could spread to the entire population of the Earth within, it's like 27,000 hours or something like this, but I'm not good at maths. That might be 2, 3, 4 years, or maybe it's 1 year. I can't remember. But he realises that no one can leave that base. If he's still human, then the only way to be certain and not spread it to the rest of the planet is if everyone is dead. And it's interesting because they could have gone down the route of he then tries to kill everyone, but instead you see that he busts up the communication equipment, and when people try to stop him, he has a gun and he shoots quite poorly towards them. So maybe it is intended as warning shots. You don't dive enough into this character to understand. Is he just insane trying to kill everyone, or is he just trying to say we need to stop because he's panicked? Because obviously he's the one that's begun to understand this. Now, they restrain him, and we see the character once or twice more where someone speaks to him and he says, "Hey, I'm feeling better now, I want to be let out." And they don't let him out, and you don't see his character until it's apparent towards the end that he has now been got and he is a thing. But clearly, with his actions, he wasn't a thing when he was destroying the communication equipment, because that wouldn't be in the alien's interest if they wanted to get out there. So, and to reach the rest of civilization. So we don't know when he got assimilated, but it's a shame, because you could do a version of this story where the bad guy is actually a good guy who becomes like a serial killer, like a mass murderer, trying to kill everyone else so they don't spread the virus. And I'm going to just say the context of when I'm speaking about this. There is the whole COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic happening in the world, and so I apologise if any of this talking about viruses or this alien foreign body, this thing, and spread of something. I don't mean to draw any unfortunate parallels with that. I'm just talking about the movie The Thing, which is a film I love, and there's a lot of films that can connect to that idea, but I just wanted to put out there that this wasn't meaning to connect to that idea directly. But anyway, let's continue on with the chat. So they're now truly isolated. They can't contact the outside world anymore, and they start to see that someone gets attacked, someone else gets attacked, and it's like, when did it happen to that person? And they come up with the idea of a test, that if one tiny little piece of this virus will try and is enough to take over a person. I'll stop saying virus. This thing, this alien life form, is enough to assimilate a person, and imitate them. Then perhaps if they were to get a little bit of everyone's blood, their DNA, and mix it with something not mix it with something. They said about mixing it with a blood serum test, but then someone destroyed all the blood, obviously the thing, and they raised the question of who could have done that. One person has the keys, which is Gary, the captain, and then Dr. Cooper is the one that uses the equipment and suggested the test. Now, if one of those two was the thing, one of those two potentially could have sabotaged the blood bank, but they never clarify who did that. And that's something that is very clever of the film, because these things can happen and they don't ever need to explain it. It's plot convenience, but it's also believable just because it's a mystery that they don't need to solve. All we need to know is that some people there are things, and they are sabotaging things which people aren't aware of. There is some covert action happening from the monster. But Kurt Russell gets the idea that the individual parts of the thing will try and defend itself. So if he makes a needle hot and pokes it into everyone's blood sample, if they've got infected blood, then the blood will try and escape because it's its own animal. And it does happen to one of them, which is interesting, because if you go back and just watch his actions, there's nothing to suggest he might be a thing. And one of the characters, I forget which one, has a heart attack, and when they're trying to revive him, it turns out he's a thing. And earlier in the film, just when he's on his own, you see him clutching his chest going like, ah. Now, is that the thing had imitated him, and it had imitated his heart condition, potentially? The thing can mutate, so why it would imitate a heart condition? Because I think it just takes on a physical appearance. It seems to take on their memories as well. So why shouldn't it take on a heart condition? Who knows? But the other thought is, just from the way he was reacting, is there a chance that an imitation doesn't quite know they're a thing? Perhaps because they've got the memories of the person they've assimilated. Perhaps they're carrying on somewhat independently, unaware that they are a thing. And it might be that when it, like, fight and flight kicks in, or maybe it takes time for this new being to be born into the world before they suddenly start having the independent thoughts of the thing that's taken them over. So we'll figure that out a little bit. Or perhaps we won't. What are your thoughts? Put it in any comments. Just give the quick plug here that this is the Mega Movie Podcast. And it's part of the Extreme Improv Podcast Network. And also, we do lots of other podcasts, all of which you can find at our website, www.extremeimprov.co.uk. And this is obviously on our YouTube and Facebook pages, which are youtube.com or facebook.com/extremeimprov. And now let's continue on after the plug has happened. So, with so few characters left, they decide that their only hope is to blow up the camp. They're not going to survive this, because the helicopter's been destroyed. They can't get away themselves, and all they can do, and the reason the helicopter's been destroyed is because of the thing. And they were like, well, why would it do it? It's suicide. And they realise that the thing doesn't think it can escape now, so it just wants to freeze in the ice until it gets discovered, because eventually people would come looking for this missing, lost communication with research group in Antarctica. And when new people come there, then they'd collect the bodies of the dead or whatever, and they'd take them back to America, and then the thing would re-emerge because it's not dead yet. So they decide they're going to set a fire, burn down the whole camp, even if it means they don't survive. And the film ends just with Kurt Russell and a character called Childs, which is played by Keith David. And he seems like another version of this film could have had him as the main character. He's a bit more of a hothead than MacReady, played by Kurt Russell. But he's strong-willed, and you could see that he could be a leader of the people there. But because he's a bit more of a hothead, he's a bit more combustible. No pun intended. After saying he's a hothead, and he disappears for the last few minutes of the film. Kurt Russell basically defeats the final boss, as it were, because it kind of feels a bit like a setup that you get in a video game. And then Childs re-emerges, and here's something really interesting, and I read this trivia about this film, so here's a little bit of trivia. I might look up some trivia in a moment. I'm not going to take credit for it, but we'll discuss some of it. But one piece of trivia I read was that when you see Kurt Russell and he's at the end, and then Childs comes and joins him, and he says, like, what do we do now? And MacReady says, well, let's just wait here and see what happens. And that's how the film ends. So, is one of them the thing? Now, from everything we've seen, we've got to believe that MacReady isn't the thing. And apparently they shot an alternative ending or extra scene at the end where perhaps either it shows that the thing has reached civilization, or he's had a blood test and it hasn't reached civilization. But I'm glad that they ended it just leaving more of a question, because it opens it up more to a proper sequel rather than them just doing one scene which kind of tells the whole story. But here's the piece of trivia. When you see MacReady and he's breathing, they're in Antarctica, the whole place has been burnt down, and he's breathing and you can see his breath. When you see Childs breathing, you can't see cold breath coming from him. Now, is that just a continuity error? Is that a feature of the thing? Because if the thing imitates them precisely, and it can perhaps, as I suggested earlier, even imitate a heart condition, why would it suddenly be that the thing doesn't breathe and make hot air come out of their mouth? Wouldn't that be a huge giveaway? Isn't that some sort of flaw? It might be a thing to watch over the whole film, to see if we see any characters who are the thing outside. Do they make like steam come from their breath as they breathe outside when it's cold? But that's a thing I read which was like, oh, that's really interesting as a piece of trivia. But I think it's the atmosphere of it, like, you can watch it and you can really be getting new details from it when you watch it over and over again. It's just one of the best films that I've seen overall. Just the atmosphere, the sense of paranoia in it. It's a film you can really invest in when you watch it. And it's got good action. It's got the incredible for the time, but still hold up very well today, visual effects. If you've seen The Mandalorian on Disney Plus, and they still use animatronics, even though so many things have gone to CGI. On the most recent Star Wars film, where they had Yoda, he was a puppet again instead of CGI. And on The Mandalorian, Baby Yoda, the child, is a puppet rather than CGI, except for little bits here and there. And this uses animatronics. Animatronics are still valid, and they're very, very good on this film. So let's have a look at some of the trivia. So John Carpenter stated that of all his films, this is his personal favourite. So let's just discuss that idea for a second. So it's, for me, my personal favourite of his. I like Halloween a lot, and I think that's a near perfect film, except for the last 15 minutes of it, but I'll discuss that another time, so I'll leave you wondering why I think that, I'm afraid. Obviously there's Escape from New York, also with Kurt Russell, and then there's The Fog, Assault on Precinct 13. I'm trying to see if there's any other of his big films that I should be considering. Is there anything that I should really be considering? So what is this on? Is this his director credits? Oh, that's soundtrack. Never mind that. So let's just see what he was the director of. 32 credits. So Starman, that's a good film. The Fog, They Live, or They Live, as I used to think it was for years. I don't know why, but They Live with Rowdy Roddy Piper. It's a shame the tone of that is very different from The Thing, but it almost could have been a sequel to The Thing when you watch it, just because it's set in like a city, possibly New York, I forget, and there are people that have been taken over by aliens, and someone discovers a way of being able to tell that they've been taken over by aliens. But when you think about it, The Thing comes out and shows how this outbreak of alien assimilation could happen, and then it's reached society, and They Live could have been the follow-up to that. It's just the tone of it is very, very different. But that's a good film as well. Village of the Damned, Ghosts of Mars. Is there anything else? Anything else? No, I can't see anything else of particular note that I want to bring up. So let's get back to the trivia of The Thing. It says the opening titles attempt to replicate the appearance of the original Howard Hawks film to create the effect of the title. So this is when you see it just come up saying The Thing. It says an animation cell with The Thing written on it was placed behind a smoke-filled fish tank which was covered with a plastic garbage bag. The bag was ignited, creating the effect of the title burning onto the screen. Now, how incredible is that? It'd be brilliant to recreate that nowadays. Just because nowadays, and I'm sure this was the case for the 2011 prequel, which I'll mention momentarily, I'm sure they'd just do it on CGI nowadays. They wouldn't go to all these practical effects just to create a cool font and transition and way that something comes onto screen with light pouring through it. Wouldn't need to, just do it with computer. Okay, it says at around 15 minutes into the film, when the dog wanders down the hallway and pauses outside a door, we see a shadow of one of the men beckoning it in. John Carpenter wanted it to be mysterious which character was involved, so it didn't use any of the actors in the cast to cast the shadow. Now, I remember 1 or 2 points where you see things like this, where you're not sure who someone's silhouette is, but you can kind of tell who it isn't, at least, because I'm not sure if it made it look like he'd got a bald head, or if it, like, some of the characters have got very noticeable shapes to their head with their hair, and or curly hair, or big hair, or like longer hair. So you could narrow it down, but it's an interesting thing, and it's a clever way of keeping things mysterious there. And again, it doesn't say, oh, but it turns out this would have been Fuchs or Doctor whatever. There was probably no plan. It was just something that you can do in a film where it's like, there needs to be a mystery moment here, and we're going to leave it a mystery. Okay. So let's have a look. What else? Just had a quick sip of a drink. The film's budget was 15 million. See, that's 1982. I wish I had 15 million to make a film nowadays. I could make a film that would be as good as The Thing. I couldn't, just because things nowadays would cost, to make the same film nowadays to the exact same standard, let alone inflation, would probably cost 150 million. It's ridiculous. Let's have a look. It says some scenes were shot with stop motion animation, but they were rejected because they looked too fake. It'd be great to see if there was any of these shots still in existence. Because we saw some animatronics and puppetry, and you do get like weird cuts where it's like a person suddenly swapped out with something fake, and it seems like a big jump in what's happened. Let's see a couple more bits of the Keith David wears gloves throughout most of the film. This is because he had broken one of his hands in a car accident and needed to cover up a cast. That's interesting. But also, it's in Antarctica, so of course they should be wearing gloves. I'd be wearing gloves indoors, otherwise you get frostbite. Okay. Anything else? So they apparently didn't credit John W. Campbell Jr. for writing the short story Who Goes There. He's not credited in the DVD version until the end credits. Oh, okay, well, why should he be credited? Unless he's credited at the start of the film in the theatre release. Why would they take that out? And it says, the tentacles that Clark sees in the dog cage are whips being manoeuvred by Rob Bottin. Interesting stuff. Nick Nolte turned down the role of MacReady, as did Jeff Bridges. Interestingly, I always muddled those two actors up. They've got similar looks to me. Bill Lancaster wrote the script with Harrison Ford and Clint Eastwood in the lead role, and both men were considered. And then Fred Ward campaigned for the role. Let's see who Fred Ward is. I thought that was like, what's the name of the guy that played... Oh no, Fred Ward, he's not an unknown actor. He's been in things like Chain Reaction and Tremors and other things. But Kurt Russell was perfect for it. I always find it sad when you read about this actor turned something down and that actor turned it down, because then you feel like, well, the person that got it wasn't really the first choice. They weren't really wanted. But Kurt Russell's brilliant in this role. And he was already a big star. He's a star that's been around forever. And he's still, like, in big films. He was in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Volume 2, just 2 or 3 years back. And it says, part of the fear instilled into the thing came from the AIDS epidemic that was making itself known at the time of filming. The idea that you couldn't tell who was infected just by looking at them, only blood tests would reveal it, was not lost on John Carpenter. Wow, that's an interesting piece of trivia, and you can understand it if it's true, that may have been something that would play into people's paranoia at the time. And again, I'm not meaning to come back to the current world situation, but it's very relevant to what's going on today with COVID-19, the coronavirus. People are told to keep socially distant just because something invisible can pass from person to person. And just to stick on this thought just for one moment, if you consider that at the moment we're living in times unlike we've ever experienced in any of our lifetimes, and because we've got knowledge and understanding which they wouldn't have had during the time of the Black Death, the Spanish flu, the plague, any of these things, it is now like we're living in a film. And it is like a horror film, unfortunately, but it is like one of these kind of films. Even if it's not horror, it's almost like a science fiction film that we've seen for the last 20, 30, 40 years. And there is this sense that there is this thing out there which is unseen by everyone that we have to be careful of, because it doesn't assimilate you, but it can pass from person to person and you don't know who's got it. And so when you consider that real world situations like that can happen and are happening right now at the time of recording, in the future, imagine, they probably won't air the thing on television at the moment, although you can almost certainly see it on demand on Netflix, Amazon, Sky, all these kind of things. Just imagine though, in the future, when people look back at this film, or it shouldn't surprise me, in 2 or 3 years' time, there's going to be so many films that have this kind of theme, where it's going to be like, well, this is social commentary on COVID-19. And there could be a new version of the thing, because it's been rumoured for 2 or 3 years that there's going to be a version. I can't quote my source on that, but it's just something I've had the peripheral awareness of that I've read. And obviously, and now I'll come on to the 2011 prequel, and I'll do an episode on this just because I do enjoy the film, but it's not as good as the 1982 one, because the idea of it is great in that it's a prequel. It's going to tell you what happened at the Norwegian base. But the problematic thing is, other than a few references to things that we knew happened to them, because we'd got awareness of these characters in the Norwegian base from the 1982 film, other than these few references, it is kind of like a remake of the 1982 film. And the idea that they come to the same thought of, well, burn it. Like, it may be that they'd have flamethrowers and things, but it felt that it was too much of a rehash. And like, burn it now, it felt like this is exactly the same as what the characters did and said, whereas you had the opportunity to do something that, they responded to it in a very different way. Now, their equivalent of the blood test scene from The Thing. Oh, and I'm just going to mention about the blood test. When MacReady cuts people's thumbs, he then wipes the knife on his sleeve. Now, that's the stupidest thing, which any of the characters should have been able to point out. And he would just be passing it from person to person. He cuts his thumb to prove that he's okay, wipes the knife on his sleeve, cuts the next person. It's like the least sanitary thing. So that would be passing it from person to person. But you have to believe that he wasn't a thing, because otherwise he could have just stabbed everyone and passed it on to them. Or French kissed them. But anyway, the 2011 version has them checking to see if there are fillings in their teeth, because they find some blood on the floor and it's fillings from people's teeth. That obviously the Thing couldn't recreate it, which is interesting. So they were checking everyone's mouths, and then there were some characters that don't have fillings in their teeth, or don't have like metallic fillings in their teeth, and that's a nice idea. But the film feels a little bit short. I'm sure it's going to be shorter than the original film, and even if it isn't, it might be because there's a little bit more preamble at the beginning. Because whereas this one starts with a helicopter and a dog, this one has the setup of, right, well, we're going to take the Mary, whatever her name is, the actress. See if I can bring it up, but let's just have a quick look. Can I just quickly find it? No, I'm not going to be able to find it. We're going to find out how we end up there, because they found this thing in the ice, and it very quickly, once it starts killing people, it feels like everything that happens within a matter of hours. So there's two female characters, which you didn't get a sense of when you saw the original film, because there were no female characters in it at all. And when they went to the Norwegian base, there was no evidence of female characters. But one of the female characters, who turns out to be the Thing, speaks to Mary. I've got to find out her name. So, sequels. The Thing 2011 film, even though... it says there's also the Prince of Darkness film and the Mouth of Madness. I'm going to look them up, because how are they sequels? I definitely need to see those. Okay, so Mary Elizabeth Winstead, great actress, also in another of my favourite films that have got this kind of paranoid atmosphere, that being 10 Cloverfield Lane. But she meets... where's the other female character? Am I going to find her name? Jan Gunnar as Olav. No, that's a guy. I can't find her. I can't find who it is. But the other female character just sort of like, and starts turning into a monster unprovoked. And it's like, the Thing could attack someone and assimilate them just by, as we saw in the original film, touching their face and their fingers melting into their victim's face. She didn't need to turn into a big monster to chase her and destroy a room. That made it too obvious. That wasn't the undercover covert thing that this monster does. It only shows itself when it's provoked. Although the original one there might be a contradiction to that. I don't think so. So it feels like the story of the prequel all happens within a day or so, whereas the original film, you get the sense they might be there a a week, 2 weeks, you're not sure. Time, you get the sense that time's moving on, that there's time. When you see a scene and it's just a guy at the computer trying to work out the calculations, you get that he hasn't done that in 2 minutes, and that it's late at night. And then you see Macready late at night speaking alone in his cabin, like recording a log where he's like, no one trusts each other anymore. Some of these gentle scenes, when I say gentle, atmosphere, character building scenes, they give the sense of time passing, so that you get the sense that, wow, it's really taking a toll on their mental health, on their emotion, that they're being beaten down just by the fear and the panic of this whole situation. And that was missing from the prequel. Decent film if you're a fan of the original, but you need to go in with lowered expectations that it's going to do anything particularly new or exciting. What's interesting, and again, this is a tiny spoiler for that, so I've now give you like the warning that if you've at the beginning of this podcast I said, look, if you haven't watched the thing, pause it, go watch the thing. If you haven't watched the prequel, I'm just going to quickly say pause it or skip a couple of minutes, and once you've watched it or skipped a couple of minutes, then you'll be safe. So skip now. Okay, so just within the next minute, I'm just going to say about the ending of the prequel. The ending of the prequel has that character's name's Kate Lloyd, Mary Elizabeth Winstead. She escapes, and you don't know what happens to her. But we know from the original film there were no female bodies that were found at the Norwegian campsite, so that explains why she wasn't there. And we also, because the very end of the prequel goes back to the character who started the original film chasing a dog, we know that the time scale of the ending of the prequel to the original film is so close that we don't know that she gets back to civilization and that she calls for help and they go out there and try and do anything, because there isn't enough time to get people there. How she gets off of Antarctica, we don't know. She obviously doesn't go to the American base camp, so where does she go? Would she have any awareness of where to go? Does she just freeze out there? Is there a chance, if we've spoken about the idea that someone could be a thing without knowing they're a thing, that she might be a thing? We don't know. It does give the possibility that you could do an in-canon sequel to both The Thing and the prequel of the Thing. And it would be a shame if they did a sequel to The Thing set however long later, and they did stuff which completely retconned the prequel out of existence, because I think you should just count that. No reason not to. But let's see, what is The Prince of Darkness? Prince of Darkness is a 1987 American supernatural horror film. Donald Pleasance. Okay, the film is the second instalment in which Carpenter calls his Apocalypse trilogy, which began with The Thing 1982 and concludes with The Mouth of Madness. So, directed by John Carpenter. I have not seen this film. It's not a sequel. I get why they could say that there's three connected films, like how you get Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead and The World's End, and they're like a trilogy but of unconnected characters. But yeah, that's a little bit disappointing. I thought there may have been some unofficial or straight to DVD sequels that I wasn't aware of. But anyway, I'm definitely going to talk about The Thing another day, because I've not watched it yesterday or today to be able to speak about all of the tiny points which I'm going to watch it next time. So I think, oh my god, I should have spoken about this on the podcast. So I will speak more about The Thing, and I will do something that speaks about the prequel in depth in the future. But for now, let me just give the quick plugs. This is the Mega Movie Podcast. Please tell your friends if you enjoyed it. Tell your family. Even if you enjoy it and you don't think they would, if they've got an iPhone or whatever, tell them to give it a little subscribe, and who knows, maybe one day there'll be a film that I cover that they do want to know about and they'll enjoy it. So the more subscribes I've got, the better. It helps the show a great deal. It helps us to be able to keep going. The more listeners, even better. You can subscribe to this on any of the major podcast platforms: iTunes, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and so on and so forth, Spotify. You can also find lots and lots of other podcasts that we do, including the Super Kick Mania Pro Wrestling Podcast. We've just done a preview of WrestleMania and about to do a review of WrestleMania tomorrow on Monday. We have the Games Monster podcast, which looks at video games. We're about to launch a couple more podcasts, which I won't name just in case they get delayed a little bit. But we also have 3 improv-based podcasts, including the Extreme Improv Podcast Radio Rumble, which is a live Whose Lines It Anyway style improv podcast, comedy show. Then there's the Extreme Improv Chat Show, where I speak to different actors and comedians, and it will touch on improv, but also anything else they want to talk about. And of course the Extreme Improv Skills Show, which if you're interested in learning skills of improvisation, you can do that there. Now the Mega Movie podcast, as well as any of them, are also available on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Extreme Improv. And they also get uploaded to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Extreme Improv. We're on Twitter at Extreme Improv, and that's probably just about enough plugs today. But you can find any of our streaming shows. The last plug I'll give, in fact, is because it's the whole coronavirus thing happening and everyone's self-isolating. If you want to laugh, if you want something just to enjoy once or twice a week, we've been doing some live comedy shows, usually on a Wednesday night at 9 p.m, but they've been on other days. Thursdays last couple of weeks, but they'll be on other days as well, which is the Extreme Improv Extremed show. So go to YouTube channel, Facebook channel, we're on twitch.tv/Extreme Improv, and look us up, find out when we're going to be playing, and it's an interactive show. You can give suggestions, which will make up scenes and impressions of, and so much of it is movie references that I think it's something that people who enjoy the Mega Movie podcast will actually enjoy. So that was more plugs than I said I'd give, but thank you so much. And my name is, of course, David Pstansky. You can follow me on Twitter and all these kind of things by going to @David Pstansky. So, until next time, have a good Sunday, stay safe, or whenever you're listening to this, stay safe every day, and byes for now. Byes.